In 1992, a 5-year-old girl named Sarah Michelle Thompson woke up screaming in her suburban bedroom in Cedar Falls, Iowa. She wasn't crying about monsters under the bed. She was sobbing because she missed her old life in Hollywood. The Thompson family had no connection to the entertainment industry. David Thompson worked at a local insurance company. His wife, Linda, was a kindergarten teacher. They lived in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, surrounded by cornfields and small-town values. Yet their youngest daughter claimed she used to be a famous actress who died in 1962. Sarah's behavior had been unusual from the moment she could speak. While other toddlers played with dolls, she would stand in front of mirrors, posing and blowing kisses. She hummed melodies no one recognized. She spoke about missing her other house and her other life. At first, David and Linda dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Children create fantasy worlds. It's normal development. But Sarah's stories weren't random fairy tales. They were specific, detailed, and consistent. She described living in a white house with a swimming pool. She talked about wearing beautiful dresses and having her picture taken by men with big cameras. She mentioned working with someone named Arthur and being married to a man who played baseball. She spoke about feeling lonely despite being surrounded by people who loved her. The Thompsons lived 800 miles from Los Angeles. They rarely watched old movies. Sarah had never seen a Marilyn Monroe film, yet she would often stand in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing a breathy voice and trying to make her blonde curls look perfect. She would get frustrated when her hair wouldn't cooperate, crying that it used to be so much prettier. Linda Thompson began keeping a journal in March 1993. She documented Sarah's statements, hoping to understand what was happening to her daughter. The entries reveal a pattern that would later disturb the entire family. Sarah consistently described details about 1950s Hollywood that a 5-year-old from Iowa should know. She mentioned studio lots, publicity tours, and the feeling of being watched everywhere she went. The breaking point came during a family trip to Chicago in July 1993. While walking through the Art Institute, 6-year-old Sarah stopped in front of a photograph of Marilyn Monroe. She stared at it for several minutes without speaking. Then she turned to her parents and said something that made Linda's blood run cold. "That's me. That's what I used to look like before I came here." David Thompson was a practical man. He believed in logic, hard work, and rational explanations. His daughter's obsession with a dead actress troubled him, but he assumed it would pass. Children go through phases. They become fixated on characters from books or movies, then move on to something else. He expected Sarah to forget about Hollywood and focus on normal childhood activities. Instead, her memories became more vivid. She began describing specific locations in Los Angeles that she had never visited. She talked about a house in Brentwood with a guest cottage. She mentioned driving a white Thunderbird convertible. She described parties where she felt out of place, despite being the center of attention. Most unsettling of all, she spoke about feeling scared and taking pills to help her sleep. Linda Thompson couldn't ignore her daughter's behavior any longer. In September 1993, she contacted Dr. Margaret Stevenson, a child psychologist in Des Moines. Dr. Stevenson had worked with hundreds of children experiencing various psychological issues, but she had never encountered a case like Sarah's. During their first session, Sarah drew pictures of herself in elaborate gowns, standing on red carpets surrounded by flashing cameras. Dr. Stevenson conducted extensive interviews with Sarah over 6 months. She used play therapy techniques, psychological assessments, and careful observation to understand the child's mental state. Sarah showed no signs of childhood trauma, abuse, or psychological disorders. She was a healthy, intelligent little girl who happened to believe she had lived before as one of the most famous women in American history. The breakthrough came during their 8th session in March 1994. Dr. Stevenson showed Sarah a series of photographs from the 1950s and 1960s, mixed with images from other decades. Sarah correctly identified every detail from Marilyn Monroe's era while showing no interest in pictures from other time periods. She pointed to a photograph of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles and said she remembered staying there. She recognized the Polo Lounge, though she had never been to California. More disturbing were the emotional responses. When Dr. Stevenson showed Sarah a picture of Joe DiMaggio, the little girl's eyes filled with tears. She said he was kind to. The breakthrough came during their 8th session in March 1994. Dr. Stevenson showed Sarah a series of photographs from the 1950s and 1960s, mixed with images from other decades. Sarah correctly identified every detail from Marilyn Monroe's era while showing no interest in pictures from other time periods. She pointed to a photograph of the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles and said she remembered staying there. She recognized the Polo Lounge, though she had never been to California. More disturbing were the emotional responses. When Dr. Stevenson showed Sarah a picture of Joe DiMaggio, the little girl's eyes filled with tears. She said he was kind to her, but that their marriage didn't work because she was too busy with her career. She mentioned feeling guilty about hurting him. When shown a photograph of Arthur Miller, Sarah became animated, explaining that he was very smart and wrote beautiful stories, but that they argued too much about her work. Dr. Stevenson documented every session meticulously. Sarah's knowledge extended beyond famous relationships to intimate details about Monroe's daily life. She described the layout of Monroe's apartment on East 57th Street in New York, including the white piano and the collection of books. She mentioned specific beauty routines, favorite foods, and even the names of hairdressers and makeup artists who worked with Monroe in the 1950s. The most chilling moment occurred during their 11th session. Sarah was drawing with crayons when she suddenly stopped and looked directly at Dr. Stevenson. Her voice became unusually serious for a 6-year-old. "I remember the night I died," she said quietly. "I was scared and alone. I took too many pills because I couldn't sleep. I didn't mean to leave forever." Dr. Stevenson felt a chill run down her spine. Marilyn Monroe's death had been ruled a probable suicide by drug overdose, but the circumstances remained controversial decades later. Sarah described feelings of loneliness and desperation that matched historical accounts of Monroe's final weeks. She mentioned being upset about work problems and feeling like nobody understood her real personality beneath the famous image. Linda Thompson received Dr. Stevenson's report in April 1994. The psychologist concluded that Sarah exhibited no signs of mental illness or psychological trauma. Her memories appeared genuine from a child's perspective, though their origin remained unexplainable through conventional means. Dr. Stevenson recommended that the family consider consulting with researchers who studied claims of past life memories in children. The Thompsons were devoutly Methodist. They attended Cedar Falls First Methodist Church every Sunday and believed in traditional Christian afterlife concepts. The idea of reincarnation challenged everything they had been taught about death and eternal salvation. David Thompson struggled with the possibility that his daughter's soul might have belonged to someone else before her birth in 1987. Despite their religious reservations, the Thompsons contacted Dr. Ian Fitzgerald at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies in May 1994. Dr. Fitzgerald had spent 15 years investigating cases of children who claimed to remember previous lives. He agreed to travel to Iowa to interview Sarah and evaluate her claims using scientific methodology. Dr. Fitzgerald arrived in Cedar Falls on June 15, 1994. He brought with him a team of researchers, video equipment, and a carefully designed protocol for testing Sarah's alleged memories. The investigation would last 3 days and include interviews with Sarah, her parents, teachers, and anyone else who had observed her unusual behavior. On the first day, Dr. Fitzgerald conducted extensive interviews with Sarah without showing her any photographs or providing any leading questions. He asked her to describe her previous life in as much detail as possible. Sarah spoke for over 2 hours, providing a chronological account that began with her childhood in foster care and ended with her death in 1962. The details were remarkably accurate. Sarah described Monroe's early years in foster homes and her marriage to James Doherty when she was 16. She talked about working in a factory during World War II and being discovered by a photographer. She mentioned her early modeling work and her first movie contracts with 20th Century Fox. Most impressive was her knowledge of Monroe's emotional struggles. Sarah described feeling insecure about her intelligence despite her success. She talked about studying acting with Lee Strasberg and wanting to be taken seriously as a performer, not just admired for her appearance. These psychological insights matched biographical accounts that weren't widely known in 1994. On the second day of testing, Dr. Fitzgerald presented Sarah with a series of challenges designed to verify her claims. He showed her photographs of people who had worked with Marilyn Monroe, mixing them with pictures of individuals from the same era who had no connection to the actress. Sarah correctly identified Monroe's agent, her drama coach, and several co-stars, while showing no recognition of the unrelated people. The most startling moment came when Dr. Fitzgerald produced a photograph of Monroe's half-sister, Bernice Baker Miracle. Sarah had never mentioned having a sister during previous interviews, and most biographies from that era didn't discuss Monroe's family relationships in detail. Yet Sarah immediately pointed to the photograph and said, "That's Bernice. She was my big sister. I wished I could have spent more time with her." Dr. Fitzgerald's team conducted additional tests throughout the day. They asked Sarah to identify locations in Los Angeles and New York that Monroe had frequented. Using aerial photographs and street maps, Sarah correctly pointed out Monroe's various residences, the studios where she worked, and restaurants she was known to visit. Her accuracy rate exceeded 90%. The research team also tested Sarah's knowledge of Monroe's films. Without providing any context, they read her lines of dialogue from Monroe's movies and asked her to identify the characters and scenes. Sarah recognized quotes from Some Like It Hot, The 7-Year Itch, and Bus Stop, while expressing confusion about lines from other actresses' films. On the final day of investigation, Dr. Fitzgerald attempted to verify one of Sarah's most specific claims. The little girl had repeatedly mentioned a particular piece of jewelry that Monroe wore, a pearl necklace given to her by Joe DiMaggio. Sarah described the necklace in precise detail, including the number of pearls and the style of the clasp. Dr. Fitzgerald contacted auction houses and Monroe memorabilia experts to verify whether such a necklace existed. After several hours of research, he discovered that DiMaggio had indeed given Monroe a pearl necklace matching Sarah's description. The necklace had been sold at auction in 1973, 11 years before Sarah's birth. The sale had received minimal media coverage and was not mentioned in popular Monroe biographies. The Thompsons watched their daughter's interviews with growing amazement and concern. Sarah displayed knowledge and emotional responses that seemed impossible for a 7-year-old from Iowa. She spoke about Hollywood politics, contract negotiations, and personal relationships with a sophistication that exceeded her chronological age. Most unsettling were the moments when Sarah's personality seemed to shift. While discussing her alleged past life, she would adopt different mannerisms, a breathier speaking voice, more graceful hand gestures, and an adult-like awareness of her effect on others. These changes were subtle, but noticeable to everyone present. Dr. Fitzgerald completed his investigation on June 18, 1994. His preliminary findings suggested that Sarah possessed detailed knowledge about Marilyn Monroe's life that couldn't be easily explained through normal learning processes. However, he cautioned against drawing definitive conclusions without further research and verification. The story of Sarah Thompson's claims might have remained within academic circles, but Linda Thompson made a decision that changed everything. In August 1994, she contacted a local television station in Cedar Rapids. She believed that sharing Sarah's story might help other families dealing with similar experiences. KCRG-TV reporter Jennifer Walsh traveled to Cedar Falls to interview the Thompson family. The resulting news segment aired on September 12, 1994, and generated immediate national attention. Within days, the Thompsons received calls from television producers, book publishers, and documentary filmmakers. The media attention brought unexpected consequences. Monroe biographers and Hollywood historians began scrutinizing Sarah's claims with intense skepticism. Some pointed out that determined parents could have coached their child using obscure biographical sources. Others suggested that Sarah might have absorbed information from television programs or conversations she wasn't supposed to hear. Dr. Fitzgerald defended his research methodology, but acknowledged the limitations of investigating reincarnation claims. No scientific test could definitively prove that Sarah's memories originated from a previous life rather than from forgotten exposure to information about Monroe. The controversy intensified when Monroe's estate representatives issued a statement questioning the Thompson family's motives. They suggested that the reincarnation claims were an elaborate attempt to profit from Monroe's continuing fame. The Thompsons, who had never sought financial gain from their daughter's experiences, were devastated by the accusations. Sarah's behavior began to change as the media's scrutiny increased. The confident little girl, who had shared her memories, so freely became withdrawn and anxious. She stopped talking about her previous life and refused to participate in additional interviews or tests. Linda Thompson made the difficult decision to withdraw her family from public attention in November 1994. She declined interview requests and asked researchers to stop contacting them. The Thompsons wanted to give Sarah a normal childhood without the pressure of proving or disproving her extraordinary claims. Years passed in relative silence. Sarah attended Cedar Falls Elementary School like any other child. Her teachers noticed she was unusually mature for her age and showed exceptional creativity in art and drama classes, but they were unaware of her alleged past life memories. The Thompsons had instructed Sarah not to discuss her experiences with outsiders. However, Sarah's connection to Monroe didn't simply disappear. Linda Thompson continued documenting her daughter's behavior in private journals. Sarah still showed an unusual interest in 1950s fashion and music. She gravitated toward vintage clothing styles and could identify songs from Monroe's era that other children her age had never heard. The most persistent trait was Sarah's relationship with mirrors. She would spend long periods studying her reflection, not out of vanity, but as if searching for something she couldn't quite find. Linda often discovered her daughter standing in front of bathroom mirrors, making subtle facial expressions and experimenting with different poses. In 1997, when Sarah was 10 years old, the family faced an unexpected test of her claims. David Thompson's company transferred him to Los Angeles for a 6-month project. The family reluctantly agreed to the temporary relocation, knowing it would place Sarah in the city where Monroe had lived and died. They rented a small apartment in Santa Monica, 15 miles from the Brentwood neighborhood where Monroe had owned her final home. Sarah's reaction to Los Angeles was immediate and intense. She became excited and anxious simultaneously, as if returning to a familiar place that held both happy and painful memories. During their first weekend in the city, the Thompsons decided to drive through some of the areas Sarah had mentioned in her interviews with Dr. Fitzgerald. They didn't tell Sarah their destination, instead suggesting a general sightseeing tour of the city. As they drove down Sunset Boulevard, Sarah began providing unsolicited commentary about various locations. She pointed out restaurants and hotels, describing them as places she remembered visiting. Her accuracy was uncanny. She identified buildings that had been demolished or significantly altered since Monroe's time, describing them as they had appeared in the 1950s and early 1960s. The most dramatic moment occurred when they drove past the site of Monroe's former home on 5th Helena Drive in Brentwood. The original house had been demolished in the 1990s, replaced by a much larger modern structure. Sarah didn't know the significance of the location, yet she became visibly upset as they approached the street. "Stop the car," she said suddenly, her voice trembling. "I need to get out." Linda Thompson looked back at her daughter, who had gone pale and was breathing rapidly. Sarah stared at the modern house with confusion and distress. "This is wrong," she whispered. "This isn't how it's supposed to look." David Thompson parked the car and waited while Sarah stood on the sidewalk, studying the property. She walked to the gate and placed her hands against the metal bars, tears streaming down her face. "The guest house is gone," she said quietly. "The swimming pool is in the wrong place." Linda Thompson felt her heart racing. Sarah's description matched historical accounts of Monroe's property layout, details that had never been widely publicized. The original guest house and pool had indeed been removed when the property was redeveloped. The family cut their sightseeing tour short and returned to their apartment. Sarah spent the evening in her room, refusing to discuss what had happened at the Brentwood address. Linda found her daughter's journal the next morning and discovered pages filled with sketches of the house as Sarah remembered it, complete with architectural details and landscaping features. During their remaining months in Los Angeles, Sarah continued to display uncanny familiarity with the city. She navigated streets with confidence despite having never been there before. She recognized restaurants that had changed names or been renovated beyond recognition. Most unsettling, she avoided certain areas entirely, claiming they made her feel sad or frightened. The Thompsons returned to Cedar Falls in December 1997, but the Los Angeles experience had changed Sarah. She became more private about her memories, sharing them only with her parents in quiet moments. The vivid recollections that had once flowed freely became fragments, brief images or emotions that would surface unexpectedly. Sarah's adolescent years were marked by a growing desire for privacy about her unusual childhood experiences. She asked her parents to stop documenting her statements and requested that they not discuss her case with researchers or journalists. She wanted to be known for her own achievements, not for her alleged connection to a deceased actress. In high school, Sarah excelled in drama and literature classes. Her teachers praised her natural acting ability and her sophisticated understanding of character development. She won several regional acting competitions and earned a scholarship to study theater at Northwestern University. Despite her success, Sarah struggled with questions about her identity and purpose. She felt pressure to live up to Monroe's legacy while simultaneously wanting to establish her own unique path. She began experiencing anxiety attacks during performances, as if the attention triggered memories of overwhelming scrutiny from her alleged past life. The Thompsons sought counseling for Sarah during her junior year of high school. Dr. Patricia Richards, a therapist specializing in adolescent identity issues, worked with Sarah for 2 years without ever addressing the reincarnation claims directly. Instead, they focused on helping Sarah develop confidence in her individual identity and talents. Dr. Richards later described Sarah as one of the most emotionally mature teenagers she had ever counseled. Sarah possessed insights about fame, relationships, and personal fulfillment that seemed beyond her chronological age. She spoke about the dangers of losing oneself in others' expectations and the importance of maintaining authentic relationships despite public attention. Sarah Thompson graduated from Cedar Falls High School in 2005 as valedictorian. Her graduation speech focused on the importance of authenticity and the courage required to be true to oneself in a world that often demands conformity. Those who knew about her childhood claims found deeper meaning in her words, though Sarah never explicitly referenced her alleged past life. At Northwestern University, Sarah initially thrived in the theater program. Her professors noted her exceptional ability to embody characters and her intuitive understanding of performance dynamics. However, she struggled with roles that required her to play glamorous or seductive characters, claiming they made her feel uncomfortable in ways she couldn't explain. During her sophomore year, Sarah experienced what she later described as a breakdown. The pressure of academic expectations, combined with unresolved questions about her identity, overwhelmed her ability to cope. She withdrew from several classes and stopped participating in theater productions. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, the University Counseling Center director, worked with Sarah throughout her crisis. In their sessions, Sarah finally began discussing her childhood experiences openly with someone outside her family. She described feeling trapped between two identities: the Iowa girl she was supposed to be and the Hollywood legend she believed she had been. The breakthrough came during their 8th session when Sarah admitted her deepest fear. She was terrified that her talents weren't her own, that any success she achieved was merely an echo of Monroe's abilities rather than her individual gifts. This fear paralyzed her creatively and made her question every artistic choice she made. Dr. Morrison helped Sarah understand that regardless of the origin of her memories, her current personality, relationships, and achievements belonged entirely to her. She encouraged Sarah to view her unusual childhood experiences as one aspect of her complex identity rather than the defining element of her existence. Sarah returned to her studies with renewed focus, but she made significant changes to her academic path. She switched from performance to theater history and criticism, choosing to study dramatic arts from an analytical rather than performative perspective. This decision allowed her to remain connected to her passion while avoiding the triggers associated with being on stage. Her senior thesis examined the psychological impact of fame on female performers in 1950s Hollywood. Sarah conducted extensive research on Monroe, along with other actresses from the same era, creating what professors described as remarkably insightful analysis of the pressures faced by women in the entertainment industry. The thesis included personal observations that seemed to come from lived experience rather than academic research. Sarah wrote about the loneliness of being constantly watched, the difficulty of maintaining genuine relationships when others have preconceived notions about your personality, and the exhausting effort required to live up to a public image. After graduating in 2009, Sarah moved to Chicago and found work as a theater critic for a regional arts magazine. Her reviews were praised for their emotional intelligence and deep understanding of performance psychology. She seemed to possess an unusual ability to identify when actors were struggling with their roles or fighting against their natural instincts. However, Sarah maintained strict boundaries about her personal life. She refused to discuss her childhood experiences in professional contexts and became visibly uncomfortable when colleagues made casual references to Monroe or other 1950s Hollywood stars. She dated occasionally, but struggled to form lasting romantic relationships. In 2012, 20 years after her first claims about being Monroe, Sarah agreed to participate in a follow-up study with Dr. Fitzgerald, who was now retired but still researching consciousness and memory. The interview took place in Chicago, away from the media attention that had surrounded her childhood case. At 25, Sarah remained convinced that her memories of Monroe's life were genuine, but she had developed a more nuanced perspective on their significance. She described feeling like she carried the emotional residue of someone else's experiences while simultaneously living her own authentic life. Sarah told Dr. Fitzgerald that her memories had become less vivid over time, more like distant dreams than clear recollections. However, certain triggers could still evoke powerful emotional responses. She avoided barbiturates entirely, having developed an inexplicable phobia of sleeping pills. She couldn't watch Monroe's films without experiencing anxiety attacks. Most significantly, Sarah revealed that she had been experiencing what she called completion dreams since her early 20s. In these dreams, she lived out scenarios that Monroe never experienced, growing old gracefully, having children, finding lasting love, achieving artistic recognition for serious work rather than just beauty and glamour. Dr. Fitzgerald was intrigued by this development. He theorized that if Sarah's memories were genuine, her subconscious might be processing unfinished emotional business from Monroe's truncated life. The dreams seemed to represent a healing process, allowing Sarah to experience the fulfillment that Monroe had been denied. Sarah's parents, now in their 60s, remained supportive but rarely discussed their daughter's unusual childhood. David Thompson had eventually come to believe that something extraordinary had happened to his family, though he couldn't explain it in terms that aligned with his traditional Methodist beliefs. Linda Thompson continued to keep her journals, documenting Sarah's ongoing development and the gradual integration of her two identities. She noticed that Sarah had retained many of Monroe's preferences. She favored white flowers, preferred champagne to other alcoholic drinks, and showed an unusual interest in Arthur Miller's plays, but had developed her own distinct personality traits and values. The most telling evidence of Sarah's continued connection to Monroe emerged during a 2013 visit to New York City. Sarah was attending a theater conference when she decided to walk past Monroe's former apartment building on East 57th Street. She hadn't planned the detour and didn't realize the building's significance until she found herself standing outside, overwhelmed by familiar emotions. Sarah stood on the sidewalk for nearly an hour, studying the building's facade and remembering details she had never consciously learned. She could visualize the apartment's interior layout, the placement of furniture, even the view from specific windows. The doorman, curious about the young woman's intense interest in the building, approached her and mentioned that Marilyn Monroe had once lived there. Sarah's reaction surprised him. Instead of excitement or curiosity, she became visibly emotional. "I know," she said quietly. "I remember the white piano. It was always slightly out of tune." The doorman, who had worked at the building for 30 years, confirmed that Monroe had indeed owned a white piano, a detail not commonly known to the public. This spontaneous verification represented a pattern that had followed Sarah throughout her life. Without seeking confirmation of her memories, she would encounter evidence that supported her claims in unexpected ways. Former Monroe associates, aging Hollywood professionals, and archival researchers had occasionally crossed her path, inadvertently validating details that Sarah remembered but couldn't have learned through conventional means. In 2015, Sarah made a decision that surprised her family and friends. She left her position as a theater critic and enrolled in graduate school to study psychology, specifically focusing on consciousness research and childhood memory development. She wanted to understand her own experiences from a scientific perspective, while potentially helping other families dealing with similar phenomena. Her master's thesis examined 20 documented cases of children claiming past life memories, comparing their psychological profiles and the verification of their claims. Sarah approached her research with rigorous objectivity, neither advocating for nor dismissing reincarnation as an explanation for unusual childhood memories. The thesis included a detailed analysis of her own case, written in the third person to maintain academic objectivity. She identified both the strengths and weaknesses in the evidence supporting her claims, acknowledging that alternative explanations remained possible even if they seemed unlikely given the specific circumstances. Sarah's research attracted attention from consciousness studies programs at several universities. She was offered a doctoral fellowship at the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, the same research center where Dr. Fitzgerald had worked. The opportunity would allow her to investigate similar cases while continuing to process her own experiences. However, Sarah ultimately declined the fellowship. She realized that dedicating her career to reincarnation research might prevent her from ever moving beyond her unusual childhood. Instead, she chose to pursue clinical psychology, specializing in helping children and adolescents navigate identity issues. In 2018, Sarah opened a private practice in Madison, Wisconsin. Her approach to therapy emphasized helping young people develop strong individual identities, regardless of external pressures or unusual circumstances. She became known for her work with child actors, young athletes, and other children dealing with premature fame or public attention. Sarah's own relationship status remained private, but close friends knew she had been in a committed relationship since 2016 with Dr. Michael Chun, a pediatric oncologist who knew nothing about her childhood claims when they first met. She had waited 6 months before sharing her story with him, wanting to ensure their relationship was based on who she was in the present rather than her alleged past. Dr. Chen's reaction had been thoughtful rather than dismissive. As a medical professional, he understood that science couldn't explain every phenomenon. He supported Sarah's desire to live in the present while acknowledging that her unusual experiences had shaped her into the compassionate, insightful person he loved. The couple married quietly in 2019, with only immediate family present. Sarah chose to keep her maiden name professionally, but took Chen's name in her personal life, symbolically creating distance from the Thompson family's public association with the Monroe case. Now in her 30s, Sarah Chun continues to practice psychology while maintaining strict privacy about her childhood experiences. She has never written a book, participated in documentaries, or sought to profit from her alleged connection to Monroe. Her focus remains on helping other families navigate extraordinary circumstances with dignity and normalcy. However, certain behaviors and preferences persist. Sarah still cannot watch Monroe's films without experiencing anxiety. She avoids sleeping medications entirely. She has an inexplicable fear of being photographed by professional photographers, though she's comfortable with casual family pictures. Most tellingly, Sarah has never visited Monroe's grave at Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles, despite having lived in the city and having had numerous opportunities. She explains this avoidance by saying it would feel too much like visiting herself, an experience she's not prepared to handle. Dr. Fitzgerald, now retired, considers Sarah's case one of the most compelling examples of alleged reincarnation he ever investigated. However, he acknowledges that definitive proof remains elusive. The human mind's capacity for acquiring and processing information exceeds current scientific understanding, making it impossible to rule out conventional explanations entirely. Linda Thompson still keeps her journals, though the entries have become less frequent as Sarah has built her independent adult life. The notebooks from 1992 to 2005 contain thousands of pages documenting statements, behaviors, and incidents that seem to connect her daughter to Monroe's life and personality. David Thompson passed away in 2020, never having reached a definitive conclusion about his daughter's experiences. In his final conversations with Sarah, he expressed pride in the person she had become, regardless of the origin of her unusual childhood memories. He told her that whether she had lived before or not, she was living now with purpose and compassion. Sarah's story raises questions that extend beyond individual cases of alleged reincarnation. If memories can somehow persist beyond death, what does that mean for human consciousness and personal identity? If they cannot, how do we explain the specific, verifiable knowledge that some children possess about deceased individuals they never could have encountered? Today, Sarah Chun practices psychology in Wisconsin, helps children navigate complex identity issues, and maintains a private, fulfilling personal life. She has never sought fame or financial gain from her alleged connection to one of history's most famous women. Yet sometimes, late at night when she's alone, Sarah still stands in front of mirrors, not posing or practicing expressions, but searching for something she can never quite define. Perhaps she's looking for confirmation of who she was, or maybe she's trying to understand who she is now. The truth, like so many aspects of human consciousness, remains beautifully and mysteriously just beyond our grasp.